Come away with me to paddle Canada's Quetico wilderness, where we'll catch lake trout and admire the falls chain route. This was an 8-day trip, 3 days in, 3 days out, and 2 days base camp, with 14 portage miles and 75 paddling miles for a total of 89 miles. Our illustrious paddlers included Bob, who was the trip leader and trip organizer, Greg, Jerry, and myself, Kurt. Day 1 was Hook Island to SAGANAGONS Lake. We used a tow from Tuscaloosa Resort that cuts off about 6 hours of paddling. At the harbor, we loaded canoes and gear, and thereafter a short ride to our launch point. A half an hour later, we arrived at Hook Island, where we would begin our paddle. Our first stop was the ranger station. It's $20 a night per camper in the Quetico, and you pay your fee at the ranger station. We docked the canoe and went up to the station, completed the paperwork with the ranger, and we were ready to go on our way. Then we had an hour's paddle to Silver Falls, our first and longest portage, at 130 rods. We had lightweight skin-on-frame canoes, but the tough terrain was still a challenge for the portages. The ballistic nylon hull of the canoe requires a little bit of care. You can't just bang it into the rocks. From there it was paddling off to our first campsite. We hit some shallow water spots that required the canoe to be lifted up over the rocks. We ran into some mergansers along the way, ducks you don't see all the time. Day 2 was SAGANAGONS to KENNEBAS Falls. It dawned rainy, windy, and cold, something that we would endure for another day or two after that. There were 7 portages that day. I felt a little bit like a Sherpa. Load the canoe, paddle, unload the canoe, carry the canoe and the gear, then reload the canoe again. Someone didn't quite make this landing at the portage. You can see the canoe wedged in between the logs. Day 3 was KENNEBAS to Lake Agnes via the West Channel. According to Andy at Tuscaloosa, he advised we take the West Channel because there were only 3 portages instead of the 4 portages that were marked for the East Channel. As it turns out, there were 5 portages. The maps were a little bit out of date. Day 3 dawned rainy and windy again. It was chilly enough at lunch. Some of us had to dance a little bit to stay warm, but at least it wasn't raining. At least at this point it wasn't. We had a few more portages than expected, but they were fairly flat with good footing. With all the moss and greenery, it almost seemed like a rainforest, like the Pacific Northwest. Portaging in sandals took its toll on me. The strap was over-tightened and I got a little bit of abrasion on my foot, and the fix was to wear wool socks with the sandals with a little duct tape. Days 4 and 5 were restful. Watching the world go by from the hammock, I saw a great leave-no-trace practice that I had not seen before. Rocks that were used to dispose of human waste were marked with a stick so you didn't turn it over and get an unpleasant surprise. The water was quite warm, so in the mornings with the cool air we often got a little bit of mist, such as what you see on the spider web here. Much time was spent fishing. Fortunately, we were somewhat successful, and Jerry, who was our fillet master, is seen here performing some fish surgery. Then we prepped the fish for cooking with a little bit of batter.
You really gotta shake, or it won't work. Shake your butt, shake that.
And threw it in the frying pan.
Heck,
Gotta love that sizzle. And of course, eating the result. In this case, it was smallmouth bass. While we were there, we had a full moon, which was beautiful over Lake Agnes. We had evenings around the fire, watching the flames, which is almost hypnotizing. We had a fire each of the 3 nights we stayed at Lake Agnes. I even tried a little underwater videotaping. I had a waterproof action cam with me. Submerging it was fine. We spent a lot of time searching for petroglyphs, in this case some caribou, and some pictographs, which are made with ochre dye, a snowshoe hare, 2 people in a canoe, and this canoe, which was even more distinct.
One is a bass, a really nice smallmouth bass, and 2 lake trout. And the lake trout are native redfin trout. I don't know if you can see it on the film, but the tips of their tail and their dorsal fins have a reddish tint, unlike a lot of lake trout up here that are hybrids.
Once again, Jerry picked up the duties of filleting the fish. He's the master. Bob cooked up a fish curry for us that night.
Does that look fantastic or what?
What kind of curry is that, Bob?
Fish curry, India House.
India House.
Fish curry.
With trout.
Trout, yes.
Life is good. All right, here's Jerry, one of the trout catchers. Let's see how it is.
Ooh, magnifique.
We had some bass and some rice left over from the night before, so I made a fish fried rice for breakfast the next day. Day 6 was Lake Agnes to Canyon Falls.
Second portage of the day. The East Agnes Channel. We just took out of the water right down here. The beaver dam there. And that's where the channel goes down there. Obviously not canoeable. Beautiful maple tree. And there goes Jerry walking down the portage. Second leg of a wonderful portage here on the west channel of Lake Agnes. Nice mud and rocks. Not easy to keep one's balance as you go from rock to rock.
Day 7 was Canyon Falls to Silver Falls.
Some of these put-ins on the way upstream are a little sketchy. This is where we're putting in. Now we have to paddle out into the current, and there's the waterfall right there. So if you get swept over right there, you're toast. So we have to kind of hug the shoreline along here and then head upstream, all as well. Day 7 lunch. Real short portage here. We started out, brought the boats up right down there after paddling about 45 minutes and paddled around One Falls, or we portaged around One Falls, and we're going to have lunch here before we paddle up just a short distance there to the next falls, where we portage once again.
A typical lunch was peanut butter and jelly with a beef stick and some cheese. For navigation, we used Fisher and Mackenzie maps. I brought Gaia GPS with me on my iPhone. The Canada Topo map was quite helpful, but some of the portages were off by a few hundred feet. Our last day was Silver Falls to Hook Island.
Our last morning here in the Quetico, just doing the last packing up. This is our beautiful little campsite. We had a great view of the setting sun, and our canoes are right down here. There's Jerry getting ready to start loading up. It's a beautiful morning here in the Quetico. There's another campsite just 2 points down there. That was a little bit nicer, but this was a beautiful sight. A warm morning. I think this is the warmest morning we've had so far. There were a couple baby loons right over there this morning. Okay, there's a mama and baby loon doing a little fishing lesson this morning here in the channel. Oh, look at that. Pretty adventurous. See if the mama, if that little baby pops up again pretty quickly. Yep, there she is. We are back at Silver Falls. This is our last portage. I think it's 130 rods. So it's a long one and a tough one, but it's the last one. Boy, the falls is a lot prettier in the sunshine than it was on the gray day on which we began. But great spot here at Silver Falls. Wouldn't want to ride over the top of that in a canoe. That would be a tough ride. Nice little rainbow off the mist there.
We saw lots of beaver activity and lodges, but we never actually did see a beaver on this trip. Our tow arrived at Hook Island to take us back to the harbor. It was another short half-hour ride back to the harbor.
Well, 8 days later, I'm probably looking a little scruffy here, but none the worse for wear. We had a great trip. We had some rough weather at the start, but today, 75 degrees sunshine here in the Quetico. What could be better?